Hi, welcome to Diagonal Move. Thank you for joining me again as we look at Across the Bug River. This video is going to be the update after action report, so to speak, on turn 1 of my campaign game, and I'll be playing both sides, the solitaire mode. If you are unfamiliar with the game, I have filmed a more sort of introductory video to the campaign, which gives you a better overview of what the game's about and how the campaign works, or how the game works. And I've also done a rules video for the first game in the series called Crossing the Line, if you want a bit more detail about how the rules play. So with that said, let's just jump straight into the start of turn 1. And the situation that we have at the moment is we have the Molotov line broadly extending along this sort of area here, where these black machine gun counters are, or sort of dark grey coloured counters. The Germans are amassed here near the town of Ustilia. Apologies hugely if I mangle some of the place names here. We also have down here near Hubrisov, and then further down here as well we have appreciate you can't see that, but further down we do have some more infantry divisions down here and near the southern edge of the map. During the first turn of the game, the Germans are assumed to have won the initiative, and they have up to 3 formation activations in which they can activate one infantry division, and that infantry division has the opportunity to move. After those initial surprise moves are done, the initiative moves to the Russians, and we begin play normally. There are a couple of extra little things around the first few turns, mostly around the Russians. For example, the 87th, I think it is, the 87th Rifles, which are these units here. They are unable to relocate or be displaced anywhere outside of a four hex radius of Volodymyr Volynski, and there are similar relocation restrictions on the tank division just here, the 31st Tanks, who cannot relocate outside of a 4 hex distance from the northern supply route at the top of the map there. And down the south we have the 124th, who have a similar restriction towards the southern edge of the map. So in terms of what to do on those first few turns, well, really what we need to do, as the German player at least, is get across the Bug River, which snakes its way across the map, dividing the map into 2 parts really. The first part being the very western edge here, and then everything else afterwards. In order to do that, there are some rules regarding building bridges and crossing bridges, and in particular draw your attention to pontoon bridges. We can build 2, one each for the 29th Division and is it the 29th Division? Maybe it's the 29th Army, I'm not sure. Let me check. It's the 29th Corps, and the 29th Corps is the 2 groups of units down there. The other bridge can be built by the 3rd Motorised, which is this collection of units together. So 1 here and 1 down here, essentially. There's also some modifiers that are slightly more favourable to the Germans when it comes to attacking across bridges. So in terms of trying to get a bit of detail on the map, I'm not sure if I can do this without going into full shaky cam, but there are a few bridges dotted around. See if I can see a good example on the camera here. Down here there's a bridge, railway bridge, that one. We also have bridges up in the sort of the northwest there. There's a bridge just here, and there's another bridge just there and just there. So we have a good opportunity to attack across those bridges as the German player in this first turn. Now this is very much a game that the Germans are going to have to move very, very quickly at first in order to try and get into this big gap here. And the reason they need to do that is in the campaign there is additional victory points if you can capture Volodymyr Volynski within 3 turns or by the end of the 3rd turn, and then if you can get all the way across the other side of the map here, well into Soviet territory, Lokhachi. Again, apologies about the pronunciation. If we can take, if the Germans can take that town, then they will also get some conditional victory points for doing so. But that would be within 4 turns, so that's quite a challenge, I think, getting across the map that far. The Russians this turn is going to very much be around holding on, I think, and then waiting for reinforcements to come, and those reinforcements will come during the, when I find the reinforcements chart, they will come during turn 3. We'll start to see a fair amount of reinforcements on both sides. Germans get a whole bunch of reinforcements, and so do the Russians, but then it's all Russia after that, all Soviets, shall we say. However, we do have some more counterattack orders to use up after turn 5. There are also some Soviet tank reserves that can be put in, and some independent units. Soviet tank units are restricted if the Germans get within a certain distance of the northern supply area, and the Germans have those independent units they can attach to other divisions. Okay, with that being said, I think it's time now for me to start playing, and I will update as I go. We're now a few activations in to this first turn, and the relative advantages and disadvantages of both sides opening positions are starting to become clear. The Germans, for their side, clearly have weight of numbers at this point. However, they are quite limited as to where and how they can get across the river. Now, the Bug River's running all the way along. It's this sort of thick blue line here, runs all the way across the side of the map there, and they can only really cross it at bridges, which would obviously make sense, and a limited amount of movement using boats. Now the bridges sort of tend to be, there's one just down there, if you can just about see that out of the camera, there's one on the railway line there, there's a couple sort of here, here and here. There's not very many pre-made bridges. There is a rule that says all the towns have bridges. However, there's not very many towns, and the ones that are on the map do seem to have bridges printed, so I'm not quite sure if there's any towns which don't have bridges printed on them. Because most of these, for example, if we look just sort of here, there's like a little settlement there with no bridge. Now that, my understanding is that's a village, and there's only really a couple of towns, like big towns. There's one here, and then there's a couple off the edge of the map we can't see at the moment, but they all have bridges printed on them. So really the Russians can hold those few key areas and prevent the Germans from coming across, because the points in which they can easily get across bridges are here, here, here and here, and that's about it. We can build pontoons as the German side. We've got 2 pontoons we can build in the game, and the pontoons are used for the Bug River. And we have 1 pontoon down here with the which army is that? That is the 6th. Sorry, the 299th. And then we have another pontoon up there with the 298th, and they act in all respects as bridges, which is helpful because that allows the armoured fighting vehicles to cross them as though they were regular bridges. unfortunately, at the moment, the only place we've got those AFVs are at the top, sort of just here, and then underneath that counter there. And that's interesting in its own right, because the armour, what armour there is not very much at the moment. It's concentrated at the top here, whereas down here it's all very much infantry. And I've used boat movement, and this counter just here shows you roughly where I've used the boat movement. I've just left that counter on for the video purposes of the video, and that's allowed the 299th to cross that river and start making some inroads in. And they've done it quite easily, because these Russian forces that are along the edge of that river are predominantly these NKVD border guard units. I'm not sure if you can even see that, but they're relatively weak. They've got just a strength of 1, and they're pretty weak. But what they can do is they can stack with other infantry units, which normally isn't allowed. And so from a Russian point of view, one of the things to start doing is to start getting in to these positions like here, where you can have 2 leg units stacked, and you stack those border guards with stronger units. They're like that machine gun unit, which starts the game in one of the fortified pillbox regions. And I guess what they do is they act as just a way of filling gaps in other Russian units, really, as I guess what they do, those border guards. In terms of the northern part of the map, so up here, we've had somewhat less successful than you might imagine. The infantry got across fine down here, and they're probably, I expect, going to start pushing up, although there is some challenges with pillboxes, which we'll get to in a moment. But up here, there was a little bit of a tricky moment trying to get across the bridge here. There is a first turn special rule for the Germans, which allows you to try and cross the bridges a little bit easier, because normally the bridges are a significant reduction in AFV tank armour and what have you, and there's direct modifiers, but they're less severe in the first turn. But no, despite all that benefit, we did get stopped just here, and we've also been stopped just here, which, despite having a stack of tanks, we haven't really got past an infantry unit in the town of Ust-Ilia. Again, terrible pronunciation, which I apologise profoundly. However, we do have a steamroller stack here, which is a bunch of tanks, and they have been able to get across the earlier resistance that we faced here, and are now pushing up on the train line toward Volodymyr Volynski itself. And in that stack, we do have a bunch of decent tanks and so on. That should allow us to progress quite nicely as the German side up that track, or even come down here to try and avoid the train track, but to sort of encircle the positions that are here. And these are much stronger. As the Russian side, we have moved tanks, the 41st Tank Division, down here to try and stop some of that almost inevitable advance across the river of the name of the game. So for the Russians then, how can you cope with this weight of numbers? That's an interesting question, and one that I still don't really know, because the Germans, I suspect, are going to be able to plough through this, and they'll end up about here, I reckon, just from this first activations, before the Russian reinforcements start coming in, and then things will start to grind to a halt for the Germans. But these first few turns, I suspect, are going to be ploughing across, much like you would find in something like a Battle of the Bulge type game. And then the Russians will get their reinforcements, and then things will start to even out a bit more. But in the early turns, I suspect, and it's all going to be about terrain, about trying to use what you can, what forces you've got here, to limit the initial advance as best you can. And then it's going to be, I suspect, about using this sort of unfavourable terrain around the north of the map, and then also around the edges of this train track, because we have marshes which are favourable to the defender, and they limit AFVs a little bit in terms of their zone of control. We have dense forests down the bottom, and also quite a fair amount of dense forest and marshy terrain at the top, which will, I think, be the best way to try and limit these initial German advances. How well it's going to work, I don't know, because the strongest positions currently for the Russians are actually in the pillboxes, which I mentioned, and we have sort of pillbox here and here. Just not very many of them, just a few, but they allow die roll modifier benefits to effectiveness checks and so on for the Soviets if they are in those pillbox areas. So they're quite a tough little emplacement for the Germans to get through, but not impossible because the Russians have already lost one just there. So anyway, that is the initial thoughts of this first turn. It's probably about half the turn left to go, and I will check back in, see how far we can get with the Germans and how well those Russians can prevent them from doing that. End of turn one then. We are reaching the point in the game where both sides have passed and we're about to move into admin for turn two. So just to look at the positions of the two sides, highlight the relative challenges and opportunities, shall we say, of both sides, although at the moment, for the Russians at least, it's mostly challenge. The game has highlighted a few really interesting things about the sort of tactical and strategic elements of this particular battle and campaign. Starting with the German side, the Germans really, if they can get across the river, they really are pushing on an open door, shall we say, because the Russian forces are spread out. They're relatively quite weak and relatively low in number at this point in the game. And for example, down here where the 299th have crossed the river, the Bug River, using boat movement and a pontoon, they very quickly got through the fortified region and on towards their eventual objective within the game, which is to get people off the map on the eastern side, in order to score victory points and claim the victory point X's that are dotted around on the eastern side of the map. Just bang the camera there. Similarly, here we've managed to take the bridge at the town of Vigodanka and get quite a few units of the 44th, I think it is, across the river, and the 298th just there using a pontoon bridge. However, where the Germans have not been able to cross the river at all, things have proved much more challenging, most notably probably up the top here. If I can try and just get the camera a little bit closer without losing focus and everything. Just here. The 14th Panzer Division has basically had a massive logjam. The reason is the Russians have put in a huge effort here at that town. The town is called Ustylya, and the Russians have basically held on to that for dear life, and despite numerous attacks across the bridges by the panzer units and the infantry, they've held on, and motorised units cannot cross the Bug River in the same way that leg units can in the sense of boat movement, and so they've really just been stuck. And because of the number of troops down here, none of them have really been able to get across the bridge we did take, because there's just too much traffic, essentially. And so the 14th Panzers are really quite ineffective at the moment. Equally, down the bottom here, it took a while to get them going, but when they did get going, progress was mixed, with the 111th, quite a numerous group of units, quite strong, and where we were able to use boat movement and we actually used 2 units per formation activation to cross the river. They crossed the river fine, no problem. However, they could not take that bridge. and the bridge there is in densely wooded terrain, which is among the least favourable terrain for an attacker. And the 124th have again held on for dear life across that bridge. So moving into sort of the next turn, I think it's going to be very similar to this turn. There's not a huge amount of reinforcements. I think there's only a handful. I can have a look at the chart probably at the beginning of the next video, but try and get through with the infantry and try and unblock just there, with the aim of, by the end of turn 3, taking Volodymyr Volynskiy just there. But we'll see how that goes. The Russians have had some problems because their units are positioned, or at the beginning at least, were positioned very badly around this town of Porytsky, and Volodymyr Volynskiy not even in that city at the time. And so the border guards, the fortified region, have really struggled due to their low numbers. And the border guards, the NKVD border guards, which are kind of 3 separate colours. There's this kind of pinky colour here, and these yellow ones and the orange ones at the top. There are 3 different shades of NKVD border guards. They're really weak. They really do struggle to do much, except, as we have done just here, or I did do until they died. I think I've done it somewhere else. They are able to stack with other infantry units, which is sort of an exception to the rules for them, and that allows them to bolster those divisions. And I guess their main purpose really in the game is to be dismantled and rebuilt as strength points for other infantry divisions during the admin phase. And we'll see how that goes next turn, but I suspect that will happen, at least to a certain extent, at some point in the game. The fortified region, eventually I did just retreat, because the machine gunners there are quite strong, and they've all gone and hidden in the woods to try and stop this inevitable advance here. We have quite a difficult job, I think, next turn to limit the German advance as the Russian player. Have to make good use of the terrain. But as I've come to realise, despite using the terrain, there's still a big gap just here, which will be difficult to stop the Germans getting across, I think. But we'll see. At the start of turn 3, we do get a lot more reinforcements as the Russians, and we'll see how that goes. But in the meantime, I'm going to head off and do the admin and so on, and I will start turn 2, and I'll check back in once turn 2 is done, and we'll see how things go.